Right, let's get into some of the news. Much of it dominated by the virus, no doubt. Um, but then, as it was winding down, and I think we forecast in either the last show or the show before, eventually they will come up with further distractions as some of the programs that are being ran at the behest of this virus is now failing. And so in came a gunman who was disguised as a policeman and killed over 20 people, including a female Royal Canadian Mounted Police officer, in the worst mass shooting in Canada's modern history. Now, according to the reports, there was a 12-hour rampage. It started late on Saturday. It ended with a car chase. And police says the suspect shot people at different locations in Nova Scotia, and many of them randomly. Now, he was killed in a confrontation with police, and yet he was reported to have been driving what looked like a police car. Now, at 11:40 at that time, the RCMP said that Mr. Wortman, the alleged killer, had been taken into custody. And yet it later emerged that he was killed after being intercepted by officers at a petrol station in Enfield, about 92 kilometres south of Portapique. And witnesses reported seeing a body lying on the ground. Why the difference and the disparities again? You know, it doesn't take away that some people were killed, but these disparities in the reports suggest that this was possibly another Manchurian candidate. Now, given the background of the virus, the fact that the report listed a cop, a teacher, and a nurse as amongst the dead raises more suspicions to me. Time will tell. I suspect, sadly, and I hope I'm wrong. Like I said, there's times when I wish I was wrong. We're going to see more of these incidents to deflect from people questioning what's really going on with the coronavirus. I'm going to go to Scotland next. A report came out this week of half of Scotland's privately run care homes have suspected coronavirus cases, according to industry leaders, and the trade body Scottish Care said the impact of the virus on residents alongside staff absence levels of up to 30% had put homes under huge strain. I thought they were essential. Perhaps not. And there have been concerns over the number of deaths and adequate protective equipment at the care homes. Fears have also been raised over a postcode lottery when it comes to testing care workers and also residents. Now, Scottish Care members provide the vast majority of Scotland's 36,000 care home beds, with Chief Executive Mr. Donald Mackerskill saying the virus had left the sector facing an unprecedented challenge on every front. And they went on to report that the outbreak has killed several residents at care homes in Dumbarton, North Lanarkshire and Tranent in the recent weeks. Mr. Trump came out on Saturday and had to defend his decision again. Funny enough, I don't recall previous presidents having to defend their decisions on such regularity or at all in some cases. But he fired the top watchdog of the US intelligence community, saying Michael Atkinson did a terrible job in handling the whistleblower complaint that triggered an impeachment probe of Trump last year. And he said he took a fake report and he brought it to Congress, Trump said during a briefing of the novel coronavirus pandemic. And late on Friday, the White House told Atkinson, the intelligence community's Inspector General, that he would be terminated from his position in 30 days. Now, Mr. Atkinson was a key figure in the run-up to impeachment, having found credible a complaint from a still unnamed whistleblower within the administration that Trump abused his office in attempting to solicit Ukraine's interference in the 2020 US election for his political benefit. I have a feeling we're going to hear more about that between now and November. It'll be back to the Russians again shortly, or Chinese. It's just the way they operate. Next two reports are kind of concerning, but not a surprise for those who have listened to the From Russia with Love. And they're both from India. And some 900,000 female community health workers who are on the front line as part of India's battle against COVID-19. But their concerns are they are poorly paid, ill-prepared and vulnerable to attacks and social stigma, according to the reports from the BBC. And the value of our life is just 30 rupees, which is less than $1, according to the government. And Alka Nalaweda, a community health worker in the western state of Maharashtra, the government is paying us 1,000 rupees, which is $13 a month. Not a day, not a week, $13 a month for corona-related work. That is 30 rupees daily for putting our life in danger, and Ms. Nalawade is among the state's 70,000 ASHAs, short for Accredited Social Health Activists. Now, she's a single mother and has been doing this job for 10 years now in the Pawawadi village where she lives. And for one, they don't have the right gear, including masks or sanitizers, and India is facing a severe shortage of personal protection equipment, and even doctors and nurses are unprotected. Like I said, it's not a surprise in that country. The sheer wealth of that country, when between 7, 8 or 9 out of the top 10 richest people are all in India, and all they can afford is to pay a nurse $13 a month, whilst these people sit in ivory towers with billions. And this is why the people have to come together. You know, if everyone walks out, who's going to do it? They'll soon change the pay, but it needs all the people to walk out, and it needs all the people to support them as well. You can't just walk out with a couple of dozen, they'll just crush you. But if everyone gets together, maybe India needs another Gandhi. Just down tools. ThyroCare, a private diagnostic laboratory in India, has just started testing for COVID-19 when the Supreme Court ordered all tests to be carried out for free. And they complained, we thought the order would say the rich would pay and the government would pay for the poor, according to the Mr. Velamani, the ThyroCare's founder. Now, bear in mind that when the nurses is being paid $13 a month for corona-related work, these testing kits are $59, near 4 months' pay. And so it's not a cheap test, but the court did not clarify if and how private labs would be reimbursed, and it just boggles the mind. And panic-stricken, some, including ThyroCare, put testing on hold, and an anxious federal government petitioned the court to reconsider, which it did. And according to the new order issued on April 13th, the government will reimburse private labs for testing the 500 million people covered by a flagship public health insurance scheme, and the rest would have to pay. The volte-face sparked a bigger question: can India scale up testing for COVID-19 if it's not free? Absolutely shocking. Reminds me of the Pentagon, doesn't it? As they were going to make billions on the testing kits they had before the virus started. Oops. And here's why. US State Department cables show that embassy officials were worried about biosecurity at a virus lab in Wuhan, China. And the lab is in the same city where the outbreak first came to the world's attention. Mr. Trump has said the US government is looking into unverified reports that the virus escaped from a laboratory. So what, if anything, does this add to our understanding of the current pandemic? Well, what we know from official cables, which has been passed to Mr. Trump, is there was a virus escape from the laboratory, which has links to clowns in California, and also Harvard, and also Langley. Now, from what we were told by a Chinese governor, is it was contained within the first 14 days. We'll have more on that later. Now, the Washington Post has reported information obtained from diplomatic cables, and they show that in 2018, US science diplomats were sent on repeated visits to a Chinese research facility, and officials sent 2 warnings to Washington about inadequate safety at the lab. And the column says that the officials were worried about safety and management weaknesses at the Wuhan Institute of Virology and actually called for more help. And it also claims diplomats were concerned the lab's research on bat coronaviruses could risk a new SARS-like pandemic. Highlighted for a reason. The newspaper says the cables fueled more recent discussions in the US government about whether Wuhan or another lab in Wuhan could have been the source of the virus behind the current pandemic. And in addition, Fox News has also issued a report promoting the lab origin theory. Well, it's not a theory, it's actually a fact. Now, the outbreak came to light late last year when early cases were linked to a food market in Wuhan, but despite rampant online speculation, there is no evidence of any kind that the SARS-CoV-2 virus, which causes COVID-19, was released accidentally from the lab, according to the BBC. Well, they talk out of their ass. They need to read the official documents. China's economy shrank for the first time in decades in the first quarter of this year as the virus forced factories and businesses to close, which are now all open and nearly 100% production. Meanwhile, we're all sitting at home twiddling our thumbs. All the Western world. More on that later. Now, the world's second biggest economy contracted 6.8% according to the official data released on Friday, and the financial toll the virus is having on the Chinese economy will be a huge concern to other countries. China is an economic powerhouse as a major consumer and producer of goods and services, and this is the first time China has seen its economy shrink for the first 3 months of the year since it started recording quarterly figures in 1992. Mr. Trump has been signing financial bills again. They haven't paid for the last one yet, but we'll see. But on Friday, he announced a $19 billion program to help the struggling agriculture sector and distribute food to families in need amid the economic toll of the virus pandemic. I seem to remember our show warning about food shortages last year, probably around this time as well. Now, the US Department of Agriculture will purchase crops and livestock from farmers and ranchers facing a steep decline in orders and massive supply chain disruption. The funding will come from the $2.2 trillion coronavirus economic relief bill. An awful lot of things coming out of that, but not. And separate USDA funds to support commodity prices. USDA will offer $16 billion in direct grants to farmers and ranchers to compensate for short-term drops in demand and oversupply driven by the virus pandemic. Now, the department will also purchase $3 billion in fresh produce, dairy and meat to distribute to food banks, community organisations and also charities. Where is the money coming from? Final news item, which again covers the virus. We'll have more on this particular organisation. That name will start to crop up a lot more. Johns Hopkins University is the group which records the data for the coronavirus and began to include deaths with a COVID-19 probable cause. So who are Johns Hopkins? Well, you'll be no surprise to our listeners that it's connected to Langley again and also the Rockefellers. All in-house. So anyone believing their data or figures needs a bit of a bat over the head, if you ask me. But they are part of a $1 billion lawsuit with Bristol Myers Squibb and also the Rockefeller Foundation, and from Guatemala for roles in a 1940s US government experiment that infected hundreds of Guatemalans with syphilis. And a previous suit against the United States government was dismissed in 2011 for the Guatemala syphilis experiments when a judge determined that the US government, quote, could not be held liable for actions committed outside of the US. Really? That's what happens when you go in courts. You know, I know some people don't like my stance on the common law and natural law. Yes, they're all valid. But trying to go into their courts and win when a government can't get into a proper course and win a basic case. No, they just dismiss it.